Why is this Postmedia takeover of the Telegram a disastrous approach in your view?
Well, it's in many ways not unlike what's been happening in our industry for years now. But in the case of Postmedia, we have a majority American hedge fund-owned company swooping into Canada, buying up all of the newspapers. With the purchase of Saltwire, Postmedia will effectively have a monopoly on print media from Vancouver Island to Newfoundland and Labrador. So
Explain, Justin.
we have a decade and a half track record of Postmedia buying up newspapers, including the Sun chain, including CanWest, buying newspapers, laying off journalists, closing down newsrooms, and pushing all of their editorial content to the right. This is all documented. So my view is, I may have an opinion on it, but it's based on facts. We already know what Postmedia is, who owns them, how they operate, and therefore I think we have a pretty good idea of what's coming to the Telegram and to Newfoundland and Labrador.
And started by Conrad Black many, many, many years ago. But let's get, so people understand the math, because on the surface people are like, well, why would you buy a failing asset? And years ago, as we know, newspapers were organs that entrepreneurs and industrialists used to shape their stories, and certainly that's why Conrad Black created the Post in the first place. But explain why these are good buys for hedge funds from their perspective, so people get that.
Well, I don't really I mean, I'm not a financial guy. I'm not an economist.
Okay.
I'm not a, but there isn't really a good case to be made, except for right now squeezing out. I mean, the last little bit of revenue and profits that could potentially be squeezed out of newspapers. The people who own Postmedia and own the newspapers and own most print newspapers still in North America today aren't really interested in the long-term viability of the business. I mean, I was scratching my head when Saltwire bought all the assets from TC Media back, 5-6 years ago, whatever it was. I was like, why are they doing this? How do they possibly think that they're going to make money? The trajectories are not looking good for online advertising and so forth. Some people right now are speculating that, including Mark Edge, who is the author of a recent book about Postmedia. But, he and others, I think, are speculating that Postmedia is intending to try to recover some of its debt, because they are tens of millions of dollars in debt already, by buying up these newspapers and trying to go after the government tax credits and subsidies that are available to news media right now in Canada, like those through the local journalism initiative, and soon the money that will be dispersed by Google to Canadian news media through that deal that was done following the fallout from the Online News Act. So, there are those of us who are small independent media outlets who are doing everything we can to be independent, remain free of the corporate interests who control so much of the other media. We go to our readers to help fund us. We apply to foundations for grants. We don't take anything that has any stipulation of editorial or would give anybody else editorial control. But then we have these American hedge fund owned companies coming in and buying up our media and trying to take those resources that just get a little bit more profit before they eventually shut everything down. And I think that's what's coming.
To your point, too, sorry to interrupt for a second, and you nailed it. I mean, it's debt that has value for these hedge funds. Swapping debt, we won't get into the intricate aspects of that, but people want to Google that and look into the value of swapping debt. That's why a lot of these hedge funds do all of that. Why doesn't this create, or does it create, any opportunities for the independent?
I'm glad you asked that, because that's one way of looking at it. Listen, the independent doesn't want to see any newspapers or any media shut down. I remember in 2013 or 2014 when TC Media shut down several newspapers in the province. I think it was the Placentia Bay one. I had called TC Media or emailed them to get a statement saying, instead of shutting this newspaper down, why don't you work with the community to see if you can put the newspaper back into their hands? Like, communities have had these publications for decades, for generations. And in some cases, these are old papers, like the Western Star, which was shut down, is old. The Telegram's been around for 100 and something years. But these companies aren't interested in returning publications back to the community, because the community is not who these companies and corporations are serving by taking ownership of them and then eventually shutting them down. The Independent, I mean, I think that we would all be living in a much, much healthier democratic society if we were able to go back to the period of time where we had lots of different news outlets, lots of different opinions and perspectives to glean from, to make informed decisions that affect our lives, including electing public officials and stuff. So as far as, you know, the Independent, the thing is, the Independent, the print publication, the Independent, went under, what was it, 2008, I think, or 2010, somewhere around there. The print publication had to cease printing and operating. It was dormant for a little while, and then it was brought back as an online publication. The increase in revenues from advertising for online media was not increasing at the same rate that the loss of advertising dollars in print media was declining. So the Independent came back as an online publication at a time when it was a pretty big gamble, actually, that it would work, and it didn't work out. So after about a year, the publication was going to cease operating again. Myself and my colleague, Rhea Rollman, took over the Independent for free. We busted our butts, working for free for a year to 2 years before we started asking people, hey, do you see what we're trying to do with this? Let's try this crowdfunding model. If Newfoundlanders and Labradorians don't want to sit back and watch outside interests swoop in, buy up our news media, which we are so dependent on to have a healthy society, or to fight for a healthy society, then we have to do something about it. And this is what we did with the online Independent. We took over the Independent. We took over ownership, and we could have run it as a business, but we didn't. We immediately turned it into a not-for-profit and said, there's no way that we'll ever charge people for the information we produce. It's going to have to be available to everybody, because a lot of people can't afford to access our content if we put a paywall on it.
You could have gone all Bloomberg there.
We said, how many people in the province are interested in chipping in? You know, if we had $1 for every resident of the province, we would be able to have a fully functional, successful, big media outlet with people, with journalists around the province. But we're nowhere near that. We have about 300 and something people, mostly Newfoundland and Labrador residents, who chip in and donate monthly, anywhere from $5 to $20, $30 a month. And that's what we need. That's the only hope I think we have to maintain our own independent media in Newfoundland and Labrador. It almost doesn't exist. So back to your question, Tim, you said, does this present an opportunity for the Independent? I don't like to look at it at the shuttering of other media, or the takeover of by our media of outside interests who really don't care about the people of our province. I don't like to look at that as an opportunity for us. But really, the writing was on the wall a long time ago. We should have been up in arms over the past 10 years when dozens of other newspapers were shut down. Stephenville, Gander, Clarenville, Northern Peninsula, everywhere, right, every day across the islands has lost newspapers over the last decade and a half. And that's when we should have been fighting really hard. It's almost too late now, but we have to understand what's going on if we want to be able to have any chance of having a truly independent media outlet in Newfoundland and Labrador that belongs to us.